Mark was a college student living in Indiana. His house was quiet and sat next to some woods. During the day, everything felt normal, but at night, the woods made the place feel strange. Behind his house, under the patio, there was a hot tub. That's where everything happened. It was Saturday night, March 29th, around 12:30 a.m. Spring break was ending and school was starting again soon. Mark had his 3 close friends over, Kyle, Keenan, and Derek. They were spending one last night hanging out. They were in the garage, playing pool, blasting music, and drinking. Everyone was laughing and having fun. It felt like a good night. After a while, Kyle said they should go in the hot tub. It was cold outside, so the warm water sounded even better. Everyone agreed. They got changed into swim trunks, grabbed their drinks, and went into the hot tub. The warm water felt good as they talked, made jokes, and didn't pay attention to the time. Then they heard something. It was the sound of sticks breaking, like footsteps coming from the woods. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded like a person. They all went quiet and looked around. Keenan tried to calm everyone down and said it was probably nothing. The others laughed, but it was more to stop feeling nervous. They turned the music up louder and tried to keep talking. About 10 minutes later, a man walked out of the woods. He stepped into the light from the patio. He was wearing a long black coat, white sweatpants, and a gaming headset. His eyes were wide, and his face didn't show any feeling. Everyone jumped. They yelled at him and asked who he was and what he was doing. The man raised his hands and said his name was Seth. He said he was 33 years old, and he heard them laughing and wanted to join. The guys just looked at each other, confused. Mark told him to leave, but he didn't listen. Instead, Seth took off his coat, then his shoes, and then his pants. He was now in only his underwear. Then he got into the hot tub. No one knew what to say. Mark pulled out his phone and started recording, not for fun, but because the whole thing felt unreal. This was the footage he captured.
Wait, I saw the drink right there. What was over here?
They started asking Seth questions, like where he came from and if he knew anyone there. He just kept saying he heard them laughing and wanted to hang out. Then he said something really disturbing. He said he had molested a child. That changed everything, obviously. The guys jumped out of the hot tub and started yelling at him to leave. They pulled him out of the water. Seth didn't try to stop them. He just stood there, dripping wet and staring. Then he slowly walked back into the woods without saying anything. The group ran inside and locked all the doors. Some of them laughed nervously, trying to shake it off, but Mark and Kyle didn't feel okay. They felt like it wasn't over. About 15 minutes passed. Kyle said they should go back out to lock the hot tub. Mark said okay. So they got flashlights and stepped outside. That's when Mark saw something next to the hot tub. It was a phone. He picked it up and saw the screen light up. Whatever was on the lock screen made him drop the phone. He didn't say what it was, but it scared him. He said he thought Seth would come back, so they ran inside and told the others. Everyone tried to stay calm. Then they heard a tapping sound on the window. Mark already knew who it was. He opened the curtain, and wouldn't you know it, Seth was standing right there. His face was pale, his eyes were wide open, and he had a creepy smile. He didn't say anything, he didn't move, he just stared. Mark yelled for Kyle. Kyle ran in and called the police. Mark grabbed a bat and went to the front door. He yelled for Seth to leave and take his phone. Seth didn't answer. Instead, he slowly walked around the side of the house. Mark followed a little bit and looked through the patio window. Seth was standing there again, staring inside. Mark told him the cops were coming and that he needed to leave, but Seth didn't move. He just slowly raised his hand and waved once. Then he turned and walked back into the woods. The police arrived a few minutes later. The guys told them everything. The officers searched the woods and found Seth standing alone, just looking toward the house. They arrested him for trespassing, and everyone thought it was over. But Mark didn't feel that way. A few days later, he saw a post on Snapchat from a girl who lived nearby. It was a video. It showed another man, not Seth, trying to break into her house late at night. That's what bothered Mark the most. It meant Seth might not be the only one out there. There could be more. They could be connected, and they might not be done. A few years ago, 3 high school friends named Beck, Matthew, and Tyler decided to explore a sewer tunnel in their neighborhood. It was winter and very cold outside. The tunnel was at the edge of their neighborhood, under a small creek next to some office buildings. These buildings were empty and dark at night. The boys had seen the tunnel before, but never went inside of it. It always looked creepy, and they joked about it, but deep down they were curious. That night, they finally decided to go in. They brought sleds with them, thinking it would help if someone asked what they were doing. They knew they weren't allowed to be there, but they wanted to do something exciting. Just as they pulled into the parking lot, a police car showed up. A police officer got out and asked what they were doing there. Someone had apparently seen them on the security camera. Tyler quickly said that they were just going sledding. The officer looked at them for a moment, then told them to leave. So they left, but only for a little while. After driving around for about 30 minutes, they came back. This time, they parked farther away, behind a building where no one could see them. They walked down a hill behind the buildings. They could see their breath in the cold, crisp air. They stood in front of the tunnel, noting how big, round, and completely dark inside it was. They turned on their flashlights and walked in.
Dude, how did we even find this? Oh my god.
Inside the tunnel, the ground was dry. It was quiet, except for the sound of water dripping deeper in. The walls had graffiti all over them. Most of it looked old, but one thing caught their eye. A date was spray painted in large red numbers. 6/19/19. The paint looked newer than the rest, like it was done recently. That made them feel uneasy. Their flashlights weren't very strong and didn't shine very far. Still, they kept walking and acting tough, but deep down they were nervous. The farther they went, the colder it got. The temperature was dropping fast. Even though they were underground, they could still see their breath. The walls looked like they had ice on them. Big icicles hung down from the ceiling. Some were huge and sharp.
Keep it slow. Oh, I see a light down there, sir.
I think I saw movement. Wait. What's that? Hello? Can we keep going?
Bro. Dude, and these icicles can like impale you, dude. Look how
Suddenly, a loud cracking sound echoing from further down the tunnel sends the group fleeing in fear. The sound resembled something heavy hitting stone. It wasn't any of them. The sound came from deeper inside the tunnel, too far to see. They tripped, slid, and bumped into each other as they rushed to get out. When they got outside, they were shaking and breathing hard. That's when Beck noticed his phone was missing. He had dropped it while they were running. Tyler and Matthew told him to forget about it. They didn't want to go back in, but Beck didn't listen. He grabbed his flashlight and started walking toward the tunnel again. The others followed, but they didn't want to. The tunnel felt different this time. It felt even darker. The air felt heavy and strange, like something was wrong. Their flashlights didn't work as well, and the silence was even worse than before. It felt like something was watching them.
I feel like
I feel like my pocket got like a little emptier over here. Like somewhere over here. Matthew, go over here this way.
dude, that's where we fucking heard the noise.
Shit, dude. Do I have to go back there?
You're going first, bro. It's your
Yeah, we're
phone.
not leading the way. Yeah, somebody else lead the way, please.
It's your phone.
At some point off camera, Beck found his phone. Afterwards, the group continued deeper into the tunnel investigating. That's when they heard a sound.
It must have hit like here or something.
What was it? Do you remember?
A loud scream came from deeper in the tunnel. It echoed off the walls and felt like it was getting closer. They didn't wait. They turned and ran as fast as they could. This time, no one talked, no one looked back. They just ran. They got to the car, jumped in, and drove away without stopping. The car ride back was mostly silent. The three friends thought it was over when they all got home, and they were ready to move on with their lives. But late that night, Beck's doorbell rang twice. This was at some off hour in the night. When Beck's dad went to answer the door, nobody was there. This of course begs the question, were the boys followed home that night? Or was it simply a very unfortunately timed ding-dong ditch? That remains a mystery. The night left more questions than answers for the three friends, but they all heard the noises and of course got it on video. Perhaps it was something they weren't meant to stumble upon. In April of 2022, a man named Connor took a construction job far from home as part of a 3-month accommodation program. The pay was decent, and he needed every dollar. He wasn't in the best place financially, and the bonus of working alongside his longtime friend Jim made the opportunity more appealing. They figured it would be a nice change of pace, extra cash, time away from home, and some peace from the chaos of everyday life. The job itself wasn't bad. A few weeks in, Ryan had adjusted well to the routine, but the area they were stationed in was remote, deep in rural countryside. There were long, winding roads with barely any signs of life. It wasn't unusual to go miles without seeing a single home. Ryan had always loved the outdoors, and he saw this isolation as a chance to unplug. Most of his coworkers blew their weekends drinking, but Ryan had different plans. He wanted solitude. He wanted quiet. So when Friday rolled around, he packed his gear and prepared for a weekend of hiking and camping deep within the woods. A narrow trailhead just 5 minutes from his temporary accommodation became his entry point. Within 20 minutes, he was deep in the forest. The only sound was the wind and the crunch of his boots. He smoked a couple joints as he made his way further in, letting the stress just melt away. The isolation was comforting for him. Well, at first. Around 7 p.m., the sun began to sink behind the treetops. Shadows stretched long across the trail. Ryan knew it was time to find a place to settle. That's when he noticed something unusual. There was a scent in the air, burning firewood, and a light layer of smoke drifted between the trees. At first, it seemed normal. Maybe another camper, maybe a local. But then, he caught something just barely in the corner of his vision. The faint orange glow of fire flickering through the trees. Curious and confident, Ryan left the trail and headed towards the source. He wasn't scared. He trained in combat sports during his teens and stayed in good shape. Still, something about this felt off to him. As he moved closer, he began to see strange metallic glints. Shopping carts, dozens of them. They were tied to trees with rope hanging for the branches. Some mangled and suspended in bizarre positions, like a twisted jungle gym of rusted steel. It didn't look like a campsite. It looked like a ritual site, like something meant to be seen and feared. Ryan pulled out his phone and started snapping photos. He had to prove this to his friends someday because no one would believe it otherwise. Then, something even stranger caught his eye. Hung directly above the fire was a charred, old-fashioned duck ornament. Sitting in the duck's back was a scorched baby doll. The thing was melted, its limbs warped from heat. Ryan took a photo of that too, but the longer he stared, the more disturbed he felt. His chest began to tighten. The fire was roaring, clearly tended to recently. There were water bottles scattered around. Someone had been there, or currently was there, maybe still watching. He thought about turning around, thought about heading straight back to the trailhead, but something made him keep walking. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, just some weird loner, maybe drunk, probably harmless. Still, he checked over his shoulder more than once. 20 minutes passed, and he'd put real distance between himself and that eerie camp, but daylight was fading fast, and he needed firewood before it got too dark. He veered off the trail again, this time to gather supplies. He wasn't worried. He had emergency wood in his pack, but not enough to last the entire night. He needed more. After about an hour of preparation, Ryan had set up his tent and built a small fire. It was around 9 p.m. when he prepped a steak and potato meal in foil and nestled it in the glowing embers. He smoked another joint to dull the anxiety, and for a while, everything seemed okay again. With his meal finished and the fire crackling, Ryan settled in for the night. He turned on a pre-downloaded playlist of true crime podcasts, listening to cold case files as the forest around him darkened. There was no signal out there, no distractions, just firelight and static-filled voices recounting unsolved murders. At some point, he drifted off to sleep, but it didn't last. He woke up suddenly. The air inside his tent felt colder. The fire outside had dimmed. He checked his phone. 4 a.m. He didn't know what had woken him up until he heard it. Whistling. A slow, eerie tune carried through the trees surrounding his camp. He froze. His body wouldn't move. It was like something inside him had shut down. He lay motionless, listening as the sound crept closer. Then the whistling stopped. What followed was worse. Soft footsteps. Fast, light, and quiet, circling his tent. He couldn't see them, but he could hear them crunching twigs and shifting leaves. His heart pounded in his throat. Then, without thinking, his body finally snapped into motion. He jumped up, threw on his boots, and burst out of the tent. What made it worse, what twisted the fear into something primal, was that the footsteps had come from the direction he had entered the trail. The way back to safety was now blocked. He had no choice but to run deeper into the forest. He sprinted as fast as he could, crashing through brush and low branches. But behind him, he could hear more footsteps, multiple, and they weren't in sync. The sounds overlapped, too fast and scattered to just be one person. There were two of them, maybe more. For 5 straight minutes, he ran until his lungs burned and his legs begged for rest. He found a dense cluster of trees and dove into the underbrush, burying himself in leaves and tangled roots. He didn't move. He barely breathed. The footsteps faded, distant now, but he didn't dare come out. He waited, still and silent in the dark. Eventually, he knew he had to move. He crawled through the forest with branches cutting into his arms and legs. Every step was slow and careful. When the trees finally began to thin, he broke into one final sprint. He recognized the trailhead, the way out, and he ran without stopping. No one followed him after that. The forest was quiet, but the damage was done. He got back to his accommodation and immediately reported the incident to the police. They took his statement and promised to investigate, but he never heard anything back. To this day, Ryan believes the people who chased him were the same ones who built that bizarre shrine of carts and dolls. What they were doing out there and what they wanted, he doesn't know, but it was more than just a creepy encounter. To him, it felt ritualistic, cult-like. He finished his contract and returned home, but the memory never left him. He still remembers the sound of the footsteps, the whistling, and the feeling of helplessness. If there's anything to learn from this story, it would be to trust your instincts. If you find something that doesn't feel right, you should leave. Ryan almost didn't, and he knows he might not have lived to tell the story if he had stayed. This video was me experimenting with a slightly different style. If any of you have personal scary experiences that include photos or videos and you'd like to submit them, email them to me and I'll try to make this style of video a new series. Also, if you haven't already, click the bell icon and turn on all notifications because apparently only 15% of you have done so, and that would really help out the channel. I wouldn't call myself a very active person, but I do enjoy working out and running every now and then, you know, to stay in somewhat good shape. My friend Jay and I usually work out and run together, as Jay is always in shape and kind of trains me, if you will. Jay and I would often run late at night in my neighborhood since most of it is well lit, and I live in a decent area. However, we stopped running in my neighborhood 2 months ago after this happened. The way my neighborhood is laid out is that there's a main road that connects to separate roads branching off, but ultimately they all connect back to the main road, which leads to a dirt path extending into local farms and larger properties. This is important to understand the situation Jay and I were in. One night, we decided to run from my house onto a path that goes through the woods to one of the roads that branches off from the main road in my neighborhood. We planned to use that road to reconnect to the main road, then continue running to the dirt path before heading back to my house using the main road. I know it sounds confusing, but we took this unusual route to maximize the miles we could run, as our usual path, just running on the main road and back, was getting too easy for us. The run started as usual, with Jay and me running from my house to the path, talking about high school drama as we ran. However, we soon began to hear footsteps behind us. At first, we didn't think much of it since the path we were running on was frequently used, and we often saw other runners or people using it to cross from one area to another in the neighborhood. But as we continued, the footsteps remained behind us, mirroring our speed. When we picked up the pace and ran quickly, the footsteps followed suit. When we slowed down to a jog or walk for a moment, so did they. At this point, Jay and I were obviously a bit nervous and freaked out, but we were almost to the well-lit road. When we finally exited the path onto the road, we looked back and saw no one behind us. We both exchanged the same what the f*** look, and decided it was probably just another runner trying to keep their distance from us. We continued onto the side road that led to the main road of my neighborhood and followed the main road all the way to where it turned into the dirt path. At this point, we were both still feeling good and decided to push on, running further down the dirt path. However, unlike the main road, this path had no streetlights and was lined with trees, creating an ominous atmosphere at night. Jay and I ran about a mile down this road before deciding to turn back. As we turned, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure quickly darting into the trees on the left side of the road. This immediately reminded me of the footsteps from earlier, and I began to feel noticeably uneasy. I told Jay that I had seen a figure jump into the trees along the path that we needed to take back. He dismissed it, saying I was just being paranoid and seeing things because of how far we'd run. I almost believed him and started doubting myself, so we began making our way back to my house. We ran past the spot where I had seen the figure with no issues, but just as we were about to reach the main road again, we heard rustling about 20 feet behind us in the trees. We turned around and saw a figure standing in the middle of the dirt road. The figure was facing away from us and was dressed in a black hoodie, along with very ripped and dirty khaki pants and black shoes. At this moment, I was more scared than I had ever been in my life. It felt like my heart was going to fly out of my chest. It was beating that hard. Jay looked at me, then back at the figure, and said, "What the hell are you doing?" But stopped mid-sentence when we both heard the person start laughing. It was an awful, cackling, cringe-inducing laugh. Then, as we stood frozen, the person turned to look at us, still laughing, before suddenly stopping. Now, he just stared at us with a glare that still haunts me to this day. His wide eyes and pale face burned into my memory. Jay and I exchanged one last look before running faster than we had ever run in our lives, sprinting the entire 2 miles back to my house. As we ran, we heard that terrible laugh again behind us, which only made us run faster. When we finally got back to my house, I threw up, then rushed inside through the back door, locking every entrance and shutting my garage doors. We sat there panting, still processing what had just happened, and swore never to run in my neighborhood at night again. If you're a night runner, always stay in well-lit areas and bring a friend, just to be safe. As a high school junior, I ran cross-country and track, and I loved running alone. I wasn't the fastest on my team, but I had endurance and could lose myself in the rhythm of my feet hitting the ground. A woman in a quiet rural neighborhood near a forest preserve had hired me to run her hyperactive puppy, Izzy. She'd pay me $10 per run. It seemed like an easy gig. Izzy needed the exercise, and I got a little extra money while training. The area had scattered houses, abandoned farms, a cemetery, and the remnants of a disbanded cult commune. My parents had always warned me about running alone in secluded areas, but I figured I was fast enough to outrun anything dangerous. That changed one evening. It was just before dusk when I took Izzy out for a longer run. The setting sun cast a deep orange glow over the treetops, but shadows stretched across the road, making everything feel darker than it should have been. The only sounds were my breathing, Izzy's panting, and the rhythmic thud of my running shoes against the pavement. Occasionally, a bird would flutter in the trees or a distant dog would bark, but otherwise, it was eerily quiet. The farther I ran, the quieter it got, as if the world was slowly emptying itself of sound. About 2 miles in, we reached a stretch of road flanked by thick forest on both sides. That's when Izzy suddenly stopped. Her ears perked, and she stared into the woods, completely still. A low whimper escaped her throat. I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing but the dense trees, branches swaying slightly in the breeze. But then, between 2 trunks, a man's face peeked out from behind a tree. He was short, maybe in his 30s, wearing a hat pulled low over his face, a thick jacket despite the mild weather, and gloves. His eyes were locked on me, unblinking. His stillness unnerved me, but I told myself he was probably just a hiker or a hunter. Still, something about the way he stood, like half hidden, watching silently, it sent a chill down my spine. His presence felt off, like he wasn't just some guy passing through, but something wrong, something that shouldn't have been there at all. I gave him a polite nod, trying to appear unfazed, and I started to jog again. My heart was beating a little faster now, and not from the run. A few steps later, Izzy stopped again, her body rigid, tail between her legs. My stomach dropped as I turned back. The man had moved closer. He wasn't behind the tree anymore. He was standing right at the tree line, just feet from the road, still staring. His head was tilted slightly now, as if studying me. A sickening realization crept in. He wanted me to know he had moved. He wanted me to notice. I felt something cold slip down my spine. My body was instinctively preparing to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe he was just some weirdo trying to mess with me. Maybe if I ignored him, he'd get bored. I kept running, trying to stay composed, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. At first, I thought he was gone. The woods looked empty again. But then, just as I turned forward, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. I turned back, and he was sprinting toward me. He had a butcher cleaver. A choked scream got caught in my throat as pure, unfiltered terror exploded through my body. I didn't think, I just ran. Adrenaline shot through me like electricity, and I pushed myself harder than I ever had in a race. My breath came in ragged gasps, Izzy struggling to keep up, her leash jerking in my grip as we tore down the road. I had never known fear like this before, a kind of fear that exists deep in the bones, a kind that tells you you're gonna die if you slow down. I glanced back only once. He was still chasing me. His face was twisted in pure rage, his mouth slightly open as if growling. The gleam of the blade catching the last rays of sunlight. He wasn't just running. He was running erratically, his arms flailing in unnatural motions, his legs moving almost too fast, like something that wasn't used to running at all. That's when I realized he wasn't breathing. I could hear my own frantic gasps. I could hear Izzy panting. I could even hear the distant rustling of the trees, but not him. His footsteps thundered behind me, his pace matching mine, but there was no sound of breath, just that awful silence beneath the pounding of his boots. I reached a neighborhood and sprinted between the houses, zigzagging through yards hoping to lose him. My vision was blurring, my legs were screaming, but I couldn't stop. I darted behind a shed with Izzy. Finally, when I was sure we had put enough distance between us, I pressed myself against the rough wooden wall, gripping my knees, gasping for breath. Silence. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat still hammering in my ears. Slowly, I turned my head. At the top of the hill, he stood, watching. The cleaver dangled from his hand, his chest rising and falling as if he had just stopped running too, but he wasn't chasing anymore. He was just standing there, staring. We locked eyes. His face had no emotion now, no rage, just that blank, unsettling gaze, as if he had simply lost interest. A minute passed, then another. A car's headlights appeared in the distance, beams cutting through the dark, and just like that, he turned and walked back into the woods. No hesitation, no hurry, just gone. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, I took the longest route back to the woman's house, sneaking through the yard so I wouldn't be visible on the main road. My hands shook as I took my payment, acting like nothing had happened. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell my parents. I knew if I did, they would never let me run alone again. I don't know who he was. I don't know if he was part of the old cults, a drifter, or something else entirely. But I do know one thing. I never ran in that direction again. This is a story spanning nearly 7 years, so I will try to be as straightforward and to the point as possible. I live in a suburban neighborhood surrounded by rural countryside. There's nothing but open fields and winding country roads around it, and it's practically impossible to get anywhere without a car. It is a very beautiful place, but very secluded. As a result, I often feel confined here, which has only gotten worse during quarantine. The first time I remember seeing something suspicious was when I was 9 years old. My little brother and I, who was 7 at the time, were taking our dogs down towards the front of our street, near the main road. We were casually talking and not paying much attention to what we were doing. Suddenly, we heard somebody call to us, "Hey, come here." A big, white SUV was parked at the start of our street, and a man was sticking his hand out the window, motioning for us to come over. I remember distinctly that it was a tall white guy with curly blonde hair. My little brother started to walk his way, but I stopped him. I'm a very paranoid person, and I'd heard all the horror stories about kids being lured into vans, never to be seen again. I led us off in the other direction, back to our house, while also keeping an eye on the guy in the car. When he saw that we were leaving, he turned his car around and drove off. Upon arriving home, I told my mom about it, but she dismissed it, saying he was probably just going to ask us for directions or something like that. It scared me a little at the time, but I didn't think much of it until now. A year later, during Halloween of 2014, another incident happened. A black sedan was apparently following trick-or-treaters down the street. When a parent approached it, it tried to run them over before driving away and out of sight. To make matters worse, the license plates appeared to have been taken off. I didn't see any of this myself, but some of the adults in the neighborhood had made a big stink about it, and I was given yet another "don't talk to strangers" lecture. People were especially sensitive about this kind of thing at the time, since the murder of Hannah Graham had recently taken place in my area. Fast forward another 4 years to summer break in 2018. Some neighbors of ours were out of town on vacation, and they asked me if I could pet sit for them while they were away. I had to go by 3 times a day to let their dog out, once in the morning around 8 a.m., once in the afternoon after lunch, and once in the evening at 9. Their house sits to the right of our neighborhood, off the main road. To get there from my house, I can go to the end of my street and take a right, or I can cut through the woods and into their backyard. Going through the woods is faster, but the brush is very dense and the trees are close together, so I usually would just go along the street. One night, wrapped up in a session of COD with my friends, I forgot to let the dog out. When I remembered, it was past 10, and I rushed over, worried that he might pee on the floor inside. It was pitch black out, and I couldn't see anything but the beam of my flashlight and the glowing stars in the sky. Luckily, the dog had been able to hold it, so I let him out as usual. After he went, I brought him back in and was prepared to leave again when I looked out the window and saw a black sedan parked next to the driveway. This made me uncomfortable since I was pretty sure it wasn't there when I first showed up at the house. There were no other houses nearby, and I knew for a fact that the owners weren't coming back for another few days. After debating what I should do for a few minutes, I finally decided to go back and cut through the woods. I did so, and got back without issue. To play it safe, I cut through the woods for the rest of my time pet sitting, but I never saw the black car again. Now, these occurrences alone would not be enough to merit a story, but it's what happened recently that really terrifies me and makes me question whether these events might actually be connected. I run for the track team at my school, and since quarantine had prevented us from having practice, I go running every day on the roads around my house. My street isn't very long, so I often run off the main road and other connecting ones. For the first few months, everything was going fine. I would jog around for an hour, taking in the scenery and exploring the various different country lanes. But about a month ago, I was running back home on the main road when I noticed that a car seemed to be following me. I always run on the left side of the road, going towards traffic. This is so that if a car comes up behind me on a blind curve or in an area with low visibility, it won't hit me from behind where I can't see. The car, coincidentally a large white SUV, was on the other side of the road, going about the same speed I was jogging. This was especially odd because there aren't many cars on that road, and you can go much faster than on a busy one. Unsure of its intentions, I turned down a small side street with a cul-de-sac at the end. It didn't follow, so I ran down to the circle and went back home. However, the next day, it followed me again. This time, I saw it sitting at the start of a driveway, and it pulled out after me once I passed it. Like the day before, it followed me for about a mile before I turned down the same street, where it promptly drove off. This continued. Every day for a 10-day period, it followed me. At first, I thought that it might be going somewhere on a schedule that just happened to coincide with my runs. To test this theory, I decided to run an hour later than I usually did. The first day I tried this, it wasn't there. The next day, though, I was disturbed to see that it was once again following right behind me. This definitely unnerved me, but I was hesitant to tell my parents because I was worried they'd forbid me from running. Furthermore, it hadn't attempted to do anything yet, so I decided I could put up with it as long as I was careful and watched it closely. On the 11th day of being followed, I turned down the side street to see a black sedan sitting at the end. At first, I thought nothing of it. There were a few houses on the street, and it likely belonged to somebody who lived there. But as I began to get closer, I noticed something odd. Underneath the car, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They barely fit and were huddled on the far side to avoid being seen. I immediately got chills and ran off in the other direction, looking over my shoulder to make sure they stayed put. To make matters worse, I saw that white SUV, which usually drove away, was sitting at the top of the street, penning me in. I was feeling panicky now, and decided that I preferred the evil I knew to the one that I didn't, so I picked up the pace and tried to sprint by the SUV. When I was within a few feet of it, a man jumped out and ran after me. I easily outpaced him, and thank God that my months of training had paid off. When it became clear he couldn't catch me, he yelled at me to come back and said he just wanted to talk. I responded with 2 fingers, if you catch my drift, and I sprinted the remaining mile back to my house. I finally broke down and told my mom, who got me on the phone with the police. Sadly though, since I didn't get a license plate, there wasn't much they could do. They promised that they would look into it, but as far as I can tell, nothing has been done. These experiences have haunted me for the past couple of weeks, and with all my spare time, I've had a lot of time to contemplate the situation. After connecting the dots, it's clear to me that these men have been trying for multiple years to kidnap a child from our street. There are quite a lot of children in my neighborhood, which explains why they frequent it so often. It worries me that somebody less cautious than myself might find themselves in a similar situation and fall prey to these predators. I still have nightmares about the man who chased me down the street. He was very tall, with blonde curls, the same man who tried to abduct me when I was 9 years old. cousin Nate is in the Coast Guard, and he has been for over a decade. He's not the kind of guy to lie or make things up. He's one of the most straightforward people I know. Real grounded and not superstitious, not into horror, just a practical guy who likes boats and order. He told me this story in the summer of 2022. I asked him to repeat it more than once because of how messed up it was, and every time, the details stayed the same. This happened back in 2017, when he was assigned to a lighthouse off the coast of Maine on a 2-week maintenance rotation. The place was called Matinicus Rock, and it's way out there. You can only get to it by boat or helicopter. It's nothing more than a jagged, rocky island with a single lighthouse and one auxiliary building that stores fuel and maintenance equipment. There's no power grid, no plumbing, and barely any cell signal. The lighthouse itself is automated, but it still requires occasional manual upkeep, which is why the Coast Guard sends people out to it every year or so. Usually it's a solo assignment, but there had been strange electrical failures the year before, so for this trip they decided to send 2 people, Nate and another guy named Russell. The first few days were fine, windy, boring, and repetitive. During the day, they'd check the beacon mechanics, test the emergency batteries, refill the diesel generator, and scrape off layers of salt corrosion from the metal interior. At night, they'd read, eat simple meals, and kill time playing cards. It was isolation, but it was expected. No red flags. Then, on the 4th night, Nate woke up around 2 in the morning feeling weird. Not sick, not in pain, just like something was wrong with the atmosphere. The air was heavier than usual, and he said it felt like standing in a room right before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear and silent outside. He sat up and looked around. It was dark, and then he noticed something. There was no rotation from the beacon. The lighthouse was supposed to send out a sweeping light beam every few seconds, even during maintenance. It was a huge deal if the light failed. He got up and shook Russell awake, and the 2 of them made their way up the narrow spiral staircase to the top of the tower to see what was going on. When they got up there, they found the gears that rotated the beacon were still moving, but the actual light itself wasn't turning. Something was jammed in the mechanism. It was a large, dark piece of cloth, like a blanket or an old coat wedged deep into the gear assembly. The thing was soaked, covered in the slimy, mossy substance, and it smelled like rotting seaweed and mildew. They were both confused. The door had been locked, and the windows were sealed. No wind or birds. It didn't make sense. So they removed the fabric, tossed it outside into the wind, and went back to bed, thinking it was just some bizarre one-off incident. The next night, the exact same thing happened again. Around the same time, just after 2, Nate woke up and saw that the beacon wasn't turning. They went up and found another piece of cloth jammed into the same mechanism. Only this time, it wasn't the same type of fabric. It was smaller. Looked like an old-fashioned scarf or a shawl. It was red, frayed at the edges, and soaked through with what looked like ocean water. It even had tiny crustaceans clinging to it, like it had just come out of the sea. Nate said that was the moment things stopped feeling coincidental. They checked the doors, the windows, the supply closet, but everything was secure. Now they were starting to wonder if someone was messing with them, or worse, if something had gotten into the lighthouse and was deliberately trying to screw with the light. From that night on, they began blocking the stairwell with heavy crates after doing the final check upstairs. They locked the beacon room and the bottom entrance religiously, but on the 7th night, something happened that Nate still refuses to try to explain. He said he was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when he heard Russell whispering from across the room. But he wasn't talking to Nate. He was murmuring to the corner of the room, saying strange, disconnected things, like someone was standing there. Nate leaned up and asked what he was saying, and Russell blinked slowly and looked confused. He told Nate he wasn't saying anything. But later that night, Nate woke again and found Russell sitting at the window, staring down at the rocks below. When he asked what he was doing, Russell said he thought he saw someone standing down there on the rocks the night before, barely visible on the edge of the beacon light. He said it looked like someone was watching them, and then disappeared when the light rotated back. After that, things started spiraling. Russell got weirder every day. He stopped sleeping, stopped talking much, and just stared out the window for hours. Nate asked him if he was okay, and Russell would just mutter about noises in the wall or about hearing voices from inside the stairwell. On the 9th night, they both heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the usual creaking from the wind, but real, slow, deliberate footsteps, one after the other, coming down from the beacon room above. Nate looked over and saw Russell standing at the bottom of the stairs, frozen and staring up. He asked him if he'd gone up there, and Russell just looked at him and said no. Then he asked if Nate had. Neither of them had moved. They stood there listening, but the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. That night, they shoved a dresser in front of the bedroom door and slept with knives under their pillows. On the 11th night, they were woken up again by the beacon failing. This time, when they reached the top of the lighthouse, the beacon room door was wide open. Not just unlocked, not just cracked open, completely swung open like someone had kicked it in. The wind was howling through, and when they got inside, the beacon wasn't just stopped. It had been deliberately tampered with. The bulb was unscrewed and placed upright in the middle of the room. That thing is industrial grade. You can't just twist it off by hand without effort. Nate stared at it, terrified, while Russell just kept muttering that someone had done it. Then, Nate felt something brush against his back. Something cold. He spun around, but no one was there. Russell had gone pale. He just kept pointing at the wall, whispering that he saw a hand come out of the bricks. They ran back down the stairs and locked themselves in the bedroom. Nate didn't sleep at all. Russell started rocking back and forth in the corner, whispering to someone who wasn't there. The next morning, Nate used the emergency sat phone and called for an early pickup, saying there had been a serious mechanical failure. The boat showed up that afternoon, but here's the creepiest part. When they arrived, the crew asked them about the distress call they had made at 2:12 a.m. that morning, but Nate had never made any call. He didn't touch the phone until daylight. The deckhand said they'd received a garbled call that came through with static, and a voice saying something about someone being there with them. Then it cut out. Russell didn't speak the entire ride back. He quit the Coast Guard a few months later, and never told anyone what really happened out there. Nate still does maintenance duty sometimes, but he says he'll never ever go back to Matinicus Rock. This happened during COVID lockdowns. It was around the point of it where everyone was really getting sick of it and going stir-crazy cooped up in their houses with nothing to do. I was single at the time and was swiping on Tinder and just DMing people while watching movies and shows because really what else was there to do on a weeknight during lockdown? I struck up a conversation with some girl I'd been following on Instagram for years. Her name was Sophia. She goes by Soph. We live in Suffolk County, Long Island, New York, about 20 minutes to half an hour from the Hamptons and like an hour from Montauk. We were bored one night and agreed to hang out. She lives like 5 minutes from me conveniently, so I picked her up. We went for a drive to a nearby park that was closed, and we just drank White Claws there. I immediately got the vibe she was a little rebellious, but like in a cool way. She was down to hop fences and trespass and do things like that. There was a mutual connection very quickly, and within less than an hour, she came up with the idea of driving out to Montauk and walking the cliff walk around the lighthouse. Technically, the lighthouse grounds were closed past sunset. I think they may have been closed in general during lockdown, not 100% sure on that. But right away, I said I was down. I like adventures like that. So we finished our drinks and drove all the way out east to Montauk Point. When we got there, she told me to just park in the lighthouse parking lot. I was a bit hesitant about this, but she seemed pretty confident that there would be no security on a random Tuesday night during lockdown in the off-season. I mean, I didn't see any cars in sight, so I took her word for it. She said she'd done this before, even before COVID. We parked and had another White Claw in the parking lot. I would nervously look around from time to time, making sure no security vehicles were scoping the place out, and she would tell me to relax. We eventually started walking over to the lighthouse. Seeing a lighthouse at night so closely and just staring up at it, it's so cool, but it's also a bit eerie. Can't explain it, but there's something kind of liminal about it. Soph led the way. I guess it was a bit out of the way of the actual entrance, just so we wouldn't be walking directly into the light and potentially exposing ourselves. This was my first time ever at the Montauk Lighthouse. She led us straight to the cliffside behind the lighthouse that had a bunch of rocks forming a trail of sorts called the Cliff Walk. We were navigating solely with our flashlights. Maybe there were supposed to be lights on down there, but that night, mostly everything was off besides a few lights by the front entrance and of course the lighthouse light itself. As we started making our way around the cliff walk, being mindful of our steps, eventually, Soph, who was walking behind me now, said my name. I turned to her, and she was pointing her light behind her, exposing someone behind us also on the rocks. With both of us shining our lights over, it was easier to make him out. He was wearing a coat with a hood over his head. He looked like he was a black guy, but we couldn't tell how old or anything else about him. I called over asking if he worked here, and he didn't answer, but he also wasn't moving either. I followed it up with, "We're gonna leave, sorry." I was mostly nervous that it was a security worker or something and that we were gonna get in trouble, but then the guy said something to us. He said, "Y'all wanna buy some coke?" Finding out that wasn't a security guard, but simply a random guy was not a relief at all. If anything, it was more nerve-wracking, because why the hell was this creepy guy following us? Why was he even here? I said, "No man, we're good," and motioned for Soph to keep moving. I let her go in front of me, and we pressed forward. As we walked along, the guy started moving too. He didn't follow up with anything, like, "You sure?" He remained silent, but he seemed to move at the same pace as us. Soph or I would glance back with our lights every so often, and he'd be the same distance away. It was the strangest, most uncomfortable thing. It made the rest of the experience tense as could be. We made it to the end of the cliff walk, and hurried through the grass back to the car. That guy from before was still following, basically matching our speed. We heard him call something over to us. It sounded like, "Where are you going?" This guy was obviously looking for trouble. I didn't want to instigate anything, so I didn't respond, and I told Soph not to as well. We walked side by side quickly to the car, and that's when we noticed 2 more guys walking over from behind us as well. I didn't want to run because that would definitely lead to them chasing us, but one of the other guys called something over to us as well. I didn't hear what it was. We got to the car and hurried inside, and Soph and I screamed when we both realized the 3 guys were right on top of the car now. I locked the car immediately, I swear, only seconds before 2 of them tried opening different doors. I put the car in reverse, basically the only direction where I wouldn't be hitting any of them with the car. They kicked and hit my car as I reversed out, but they didn't bother chasing us once we were in motion. On the ride back, I know that both of our hearts were racing, and after the adrenaline wore off, we were both quiet. We called it a night after I dropped her off. We ended up hanging out many times after that, and we're still in touch today. But honestly, that night still unsettles me. It was too close for comfort to something bad happening. My friends think it was a gang, Crips maybe. Whatever it was, I have no interest going back out there at night. My name is Gregory. This was a story my old friend Ian has told me many times that happened to him many moons ago. I asked him to give me a detailed version in writing recently that he gave me permission to share online because I always found it so unsettling. Ian was one of those guys you only had to meet once to know he was the real deal. 50-something, solid build, weathered skin from decades working in salt air. He worked in marine salvage and coastal infrastructure. Basically, when something broke near the water, Ian was one of the people you'd call to go fix it. But he wasn't just a contractor. He'd been a diver, a ship technician, even spent time doing remote inspections for the government. The guy had seen just about everything, so when he told me this story, I didn't doubt it. Not for a second. He said it happened back in 2013, when he got hired by a small county up in Washington state to do a structural inspection of an old decommissioned lighthouse. The county had inherited the property years earlier and didn't know what to do with it. Developers wanted to tear it down, historians wanted to preserve it, and no one wanted to pay for it either. So Ian's job was simple: go there alone, assess the place inside and out, and figure out whether it was even safe to restore. The lighthouse was on a remote rock island about an hour off the mainland. Not a big island either, just a hunk of stone and dirt maybe 300 feet wide, with nothing but the lighthouse itself, a generator shed, and some rusted out old scaffolding from decades past. The place hadn't been used in years, and it wasn't exactly a tourist destination. There weren't even any docks, just a little ledge where a small Coast Guard boat could offload someone at high tide. Ian packed light, food for 4 days, a sleeping bag, some tools, a clipboard, and a 2-way marine radio. The plan was simple. He'd get dropped off Monday morning, do a full walkthrough by Wednesday, and call in for pickup Thursday afternoon. He didn't think twice about going alone. He'd done this sort of thing dozens of times before. When he first got there, the place was quiet. Cold, cloudy, but calm. The air had that usual mix of salt, metal, and decay you expect from something that's been sitting abandoned for decades. The lighthouse itself was tall, maybe 50 feet, built in the early 1900s. It had the classic spiral staircase inside, which led up to the beacon room. That glass lens hadn't worked in decades, but the structure itself was solid. Ian did his usual safety checks: support beams, stair integrity, window fittings. The floorboards on the lower level were warped but walkable. The second floor was a storage room, which was empty except for some rusted metal cabinets. The third floor had a tiny sleeping quarter that hadn't been used in decades. He ended up laying out his sleeping bag on the ground floor near the generator room where it was warmer and out of the wind. The first night was uneventful. It was quiet, like too quiet, Ian said. You don't notice how noisy the world usually is until it's not. There were no birds, no insects, Not even the sound of waves slapping against the rocks outside. Just wind, and even that was soft. On the second day, the fog rolled in thick. Ian woke up to a completely white world outside. You couldn't see more than 5 feet beyond the window. He said it wasn't like any fog he'd seen before. It was so dense it looked solid, like a wall, but he didn't think much of it. That area got heavy fog often. He spent most of the day taking notes on the upper stairwell. That's when he noticed the first weird thing. Halfway up the staircase to the beacon room, there was a maintenance closet built into the wall. He'd tried to open it on day 1, but the hinges were so corroded it wouldn't budge. But now, it was open a crack. Not much, maybe an inch, but enough that you could tell it had been moved. He figured the moisture in the air had caused it to shift, but he didn't like it. The inside of the closet was pitch black, and when he pushed the door wider, he saw something sitting in the back corner. A wooden box, maybe the size of a lunchbox, and it was covered in a kind of damp moss, like it had been underwater recently. He didn't open it. He just shut the door again and made a note to report it. That night, something woke him up. He said it wasn't a sound exactly, but more so the absence of sound, like everything had stopped. And then, he heard footsteps on the metal stairs above him. At first he thought an animal got inside, but then he realized they weren't descending. The steps were going upward. Whatever was in the tower was climbing. He turned on his flashlight and stared at the stairwell entrance, waiting, but nothing happened. Eventually the sound stopped and the silence returned. The next day, he searched the whole place, top to bottom. He checked every room and every closet. He even climbed onto the roof, but there was nothing. No animals or anything out of the ordinary, except that box. It was now sitting outside the closet, halfway into the stairwell, still covered in moss. He said he stood there for a long time staring at it, trying to decide what to do. Eventually, he picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. The wood was bloated with moisture, but the lid didn't open. It was nailed shut. He didn't want to mess with it too much, so he left it at the base of the stairs and went outside for air. That's when he noticed something else. There were footprints in the dirt around the lighthouse. Bare footprints. Not boots or shoes, but bare wet feet, leading from the north side of the building toward the cliff edge and then stopping. The footprints didn't circle back. They were just 10 or 12 barefoot impressions in the mud that ended at a sheer drop into the sea. He said he stood there for a long time trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had come ashore, but the only boat scheduled was his return ride, and that wasn't for another day. He considered using the radio to call for an early pickup, but the fog was so thick that by then, they probably wouldn't even be able to navigate back. He went inside and locked every door and hatch, and then he wedged the stairwell shut with an iron pipe, and he tried to sleep. That night was worse. Around 1:30 a.m., he heard the door to the upper beacon room slam shut violently. He said the force shook dust loose from the ceiling. Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks on the inside wall of the tower. Not the front door or window, but the wall itself. Like someone standing just inches behind the plaster, tapping their knuckles against the brick. Ian didn't move. He lay there frozen until the sound stopped. When the sun came up, he checked everything again. The box was gone, and the closet door was fully open. At this point, it was abundantly clear he wasn't alone there, so Ian used the radio and called for immediate extraction. The fog was still heavy, but he told them it was a medical issue. They said they'd try to get a boat there within a few hours. He packed everything and waited by the landing ledge. The fog didn't clear. In fact, it apparently got thicker. He sat there for nearly 7 hours, unable to see anything more than a few feet in front of him. The sun was going down, and the air had gotten cold. He heard someone walking behind him in the gravel near the base of the lighthouse, but when he turned around, there was no one there, or he simply just couldn't see who it was through the fog. He ran to the edge of the cliff and stayed there until he heard the boat horn in the distance. They pulled him out just after dark. The deckhand who helped him on board asked why he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Ian told him that the lighthouse was unsafe and should be sealed off. He filed a brief report back at the office. He said the structure was compromised and not fit for entry, but he never mentioned the footsteps or the box. He told me he didn't because he genuinely considered the possibility that he simply was losing his mind in isolation. This was around the end of what Ian sent me in writing. Ian never went back to that lighthouse. He wrapped up his remaining projects that year and quietly phased himself out of field work. Within a year, he stopped taking contracts altogether, said he wanted to focus on dry land from then on. When I asked if it was because of the lighthouse, he just shrugged and said he'd seen enough out there. I pressed him once, just once, about what he really thought happened on that island. He looked me dead in the eye and said something that kind of stuck with me ever since. He said, "Some places are meant to be left alone. They just need time and silence." That was all he'd say. I tried to look into the lighthouse myself a while back, but I couldn't find much. The coordinates he'd scribbled in his notes don't point to any listed structure. The county records mention a decommissioned tower somewhere off the coast, but there's no official name and no accessible history. It's like he was never really there in the first place. And that's the part that unsettles me most. Not what Ian said, but what nobody else ever did. I don't honestly know whether I hope Ian really was just for whatever reason going crazy on that island or not. I once met this dude named Matt when I was out with friends at a bar one summer. I was out with a big group, and Matt and I made friends at the bar, vibing over the Cubs game that was on. My group kind of dispersed away from me as I spoke with Matt, so it wasn't like Matt really spoke to any of my friends. We ended up exchanging Instagrams, and he had a decent amount of followers on Instagram, and his pictures made him seem like a normal 20-something-year-old dude who likes to go out, travel, and stay active. After we exchanged info, I went to go find my group. Honestly, whenever you bro out with another guy while you're at a bar, the odds of ever actually contacting each other again after exchanging info are slim to none. You always act like you'll hit them up, but come the next day when you're sober, you just have no interest. Well, the next day, which was a Saturday, I went out to another bar/restaurant with my friends. This was an outdoor spot on the water. It was for my friend Tyler's birthday. I put something on my Instagram story as we all sang at the bar for him. After about an hour, we were done with dinner and just hanging around the outside section of the bar, when I got a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and it was Matt. He dabbed me up with a smile and said this was his favorite Saturday night spot. I introduced Matt more officially to my friends this time, saying, "You guys remember Matt?" Even if they hadn't really spoken to him, they did see him the night before. Well, as the night went on, Matt kind of hung around for a while, and it was fine because everyone was drunk, including him, and everyone was just having a good time. The next time I saw Matt was when he invited me golfing on a hot day. Honestly, I suck at golfing, but it's something I want to get better at, so when he invited me early one Sunday morning, I went. I think it was literally the following weekend after I saw him last. It was just him and I going. I tried to get a couple of my friends to go, but they were too hungover and said it was too early. Matt and I just vibed playing golf. I think it was only 9 holes. It took us like 2 hours. Afterwards, we got food, and then I went home to relax before work the next day. I saw Matt one more time out after that, before he invited me on a hiking trip with him to Arizona. Honestly, Arizona and the Grand Canyon were always on my bucket list. I just checked the dates with work and confirmed I was able to go first, and I was an immediate yes. I asked Tyler and a couple of other friends to come with, but they were heavy no's. They said they couldn't get the time off work and needed to save money, the typical responses from any of my friends when I try to get them on a trip. I asked Matt if any of his boys were going, and he said nah, he was going solo dolo. I actually hadn't met any of Matt's friends yet. His Instagram painted him as the super popular guy though, so I didn't find it weird. We flew out on August 15th, and our return flights to Chicago were August 18th. We landed at night. Matt rented a car for the weekend, and on the way to the Airbnb, we stopped for food and alcohol. By the time we got to the Airbnb, it was late. We had a couple of beers when we got there, and I could tell that Matt was down to stay up longer, but I was admittedly shot and wanted to go to sleep. This was when I realized there was only one bed in the Airbnb. I had never asked him to confirm that there were 2 bedrooms. When I brought it up, he pointed to the couch I was sitting on and said it's a pull-out couch. He then said relax and that he's not going to charge me for the Airbnb. Honestly, a free stay in Arizona, I couldn't complain about the couch. I pulled out the sofa bed, set up the sheets, and went to sleep. It was surprisingly comfortable. In the middle of the night, I woke up to Matt walking through the living room to the kitchen to get water. I'm a light sleeper. The sound of a pin drop will make me wake up. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, Matt woke me up early. It was a sunny, gorgeous day, and we drove straight to the Grand Canyon. I had no idea just how massive it truly was, or how many individual trail options there were. We hiked the Bright Angel, I think. I didn't realize how out of shape I was until that day. Matt was perfectly fine, laughing and telling me to keep up while I was dripping in sweat and out of breath. We took numerous breaks, which we used to take a million amazing pictures. It was beautiful. Eventually, we got back to the car. We had been hiking for over 2 to 3 hours, and I needed food. We stopped by a deli on the way back. It was a long drive back to Phoenix, and when we got there, we took a midday nap, and then after that, we explored around Phoenix. And of course, in Matt fashion, we drank at multiple bars. I barely knew the guy, but I could already see he liked his alcohol. Fast forward, we got really, really drunk, but I think I got drunker, and I'm not sure how, because Matt was downing as many drinks as me. We had to leave the rental on the street and Uber back to the Airbnb. It was late. Time flew by somehow. I don't remember much besides Matt blasting music in the Airbnb for a bit and my plugging my phone in next to the couch. I guess I just went to sleep after that. That night, I woke up randomly, probably a couple of hours after I fell asleep. My bladder was about to explode, and my mouth was drier than the Grand Canyon. I got off the couch and headed toward the bathroom, but I heard something. A crack in the floor, like a crack from pressure. I scanned around the dark room with my eyes and saw nothing, so I went to the bathroom. While I was in there, midstream, I heard a door clicking shut. It had to be Matt's bedroom door. When I finished peeing, I went to try Matt's door, but it was locked. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Whatever, I went back to the couch and fell back asleep pretty easily. The next morning, I woke up at like 8 a.m., head throbbing. The first thing I noticed was my phone. It was in a weird position. I had it charging last night and left it laying on the floor next to the couch bed, but now, it was sitting on the table next to the couch and it was unplugged. I was questioning why I might have done this, but ultimately, my answer was simple. I was just super drunk. That day, we obviously didn't do any hiking, otherwise I would have puked. We just Ubered to the car and then did some driving around, exploring different neighborhoods, scenery, and checking out the botanical gardens. I didn't really want to drink that day, but later on, Matt convinced me. And wouldn't you know it, it was another night of getting really, really drunk. Our flight was at like 1 p.m. the following day, so at least we didn't have to worry about getting up really early. We got back to the Airbnb late again, I'd say between 1 and 2 a.m. this time. Matt insisted on letting me sleep in the bed that night, just because it was fair. Honestly, I didn't argue. I eventually took my bag to his room and then said goodnight and shut the door. I didn't lock it. Not that it mattered, because the locks from what I remembered had those doorknobs with locks that you could easily unlock with like a butter knife or something. I wish I could say the story ended there and that we went home in peace the next day. Well, I woke up that night, probably not long after I fell asleep. I didn't know what woke me up at first. It's like waking up to a sound, but you didn't fully consciously hear that sound because you were still technically asleep when it caused you to wake up. I looked around the room, and then for my phone. My phone was missing. I had it plugged in next to the bed, and had the phone on the bed next to me, but now the cord was just dangling from the outlet to the ground with no phone. How could this happen again? I looked on one side of the bed on the floor, and then the other, and I jumped up and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw Matt laying face down, sprawled out on that side of the bed on the floor. He looked up, looking like he'd just woken up from a deep sleep. I shouted, "What are you doing?" He looked around the room, acting confused, like he didn't know how he got there. He stood up and said that he must have been so blacked out that he just walked in here to go to bed, but then remembered I was in the bed and he crashed on the floor. But that didn't make sense because he was on the side of the bed further from the door. I then accused him of taking my phone, and he played dumb. He said I should check under the bed, maybe it fell. Then he got on his knees, looked under the bed, and instantly said, "Bro, here it is," and he pulled it out from under the bed. I looked at him, and I genuinely felt like I was staring at a different person now. Who was this guy? Did he really try getting into my phone twice? I told him I'll just go back to the couch, but he insisted he would, and then he left the room. You bet your ass I locked the door this time. If it weren't for the phone, sure, I just see it as he was really drunk and did something goofy, like come pass out on the floor, but I was detecting bullshit there. He took my phone, and I know it. Since I was still kind of drunk, I didn't really have much trouble falling back asleep. Once again, I wish it ended there, but it didn't. I woke up one more time that night, and this time, I quickly realized why. At the foot of my bed was Matt standing there, but all I could really see was his silhouette. For some reason, I didn't jump or scream this time. He sat down on the bed and started rubbing my foot, and that's when I screamed at him to get out. He wouldn't move, so I had to physically push him off the bed and out the bedroom door. I started packing my clothes into my bag, and then quickly packed all my toiletries and whatever else I packed. He didn't say a word. He sat upright on the couch watching me like a creepy NPC the entire time. It was the most unsettling part. I called an Uber to the airport. I wasn't staying there another minute. He didn't try to stop me. I got to the airport just as the sun was starting to rise, and as hard as I tried to sleep, I couldn't. My mind was just racing. I waited there the entire time for the flight. I paid like $35 to change my seat so I wouldn't be next to Matt. I looked out the window the entire time the plane was boarding so I wouldn't have to make eye contact with him. I didn't tell any of my friends until later that day. I just needed time to process and digest everything. A couple of my friends said, "See, I told you he was weird," and pointed out that both times we ran into him, he was alone. It got me also thinking that the only reason he ran into me at the outdoor bar was because he saw my Instagram story and probably came there. Actual stalker behavior. I blocked his number and Instagram, but before doing so, I went to one of his older Instagram posts where he was with friends. No one was tagged in the picture, but I looked at the comments, and there was one comment from a guy who looked like he was in the picture. I saw that Matt wasn't even following him or vice versa. I took it upon myself to DM the guy, asking if he was still friends with Matt. The guy responded back within 10 minutes saying this: "Nah, guy's a freak, run away." From there, he told me about his own experience along with the other guys who used to be friends with him, who all had to cut him off. The guy untagged himself for Matt's photo, but he said he can't forcibly get him to take down the picture. He wasn't surprised at all when I told him what had happened in Arizona, and the guy's response was, "Guy should be in jail." It's crazy that I thought Matt was just a normal dude who was looking for a bro, but he ended up being a potentially dangerous predator. I still just want to know what he was trying to access on my phone. This happened last summer, around mid-July. I was home from college for a few weeks, and I was just trying to enjoy the break before my next semester started. My name's Kyle, and I live in Maryland. I had been talking with my two closest friends, Jason and Marcus, about doing something together. Just the three of us, like we used to back in high school. We all go to different colleges now, so it's rare that we get time like this. We ended up planning a weekend beach trip to Ocean City. Jason's family owns a small beach house there that they don't use much, and he got permission for us to stay there for a few days. It was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place a couple blocks off the sand, but it was perfect for what we needed. Just time to relax, party a bit, and catch up. We drove down on a Friday afternoon. The weather was hot, upper 80s, with that heavy humid air that sticks to your skin. It smelled like sunscreen and salt water the second we got into town. We spent the day walking the boardwalk, messing around in some of the arcades, and people watching. The beach was packed with tourists, kids running around with beach balls, families with umbrellas and coolers, and lifeguards constantly yelling at people to move out of the restricted areas. Everything felt normal. It was just a fun summer day. Later, we went back to the house, grilled burgers, had a few drinks, and started playing drinking games. By midnight, we were drunk and bored, and someone, maybe Marcus, suggested we go back to the beach. There's something weirdly appealing about being near the ocean at night. The beach is almost completely empty, the air cools down, and there's just something peaceful about it. We didn't bring much with us, just some hoodies in case we get cold, our phones, and a flashlight Jason grabbed from the kitchen drawer. We didn't plan to swim around or anything. Just hang out and maybe walk along the shore. We headed down a side street and onto the wooden boardwalk, then took the steps down to the sand. As expected, it was basically completely deserted. The waves were steady, and the only light came from a few lamps on the boardwalk and the moon behind some clouds. There was barely enough visibility to make out where the water met the shore. We walked along the edge of the surf, occasionally letting the cold water hit our ankles. We joked around, talked about random stuff, and just killed time. After a while, we stopped near one of the lifeguard towers, those wooden ones they take down at night, and we just laid in the sand looking up at the sky. That's when Jason noticed something. He suddenly sat up and said, "Is that someone walking over there?" We all sat up and looked in the direction he was pointing. At first, I didn't see anything. It just looked like a dark blur near the shoreline. But then, yeah, I saw it. A figure. But it was just a silhouette at that point, walking slowly, right along the edge of where the water touched the sand. Probably 50 or 60 yards away. We figured it was just another person out late like us, maybe just going for a walk. But then we noticed that their movement was off. They weren't strolling around like someone enjoying the beach. Their walk was stiff, slow, and almost mechanical. Their arms didn't swing naturally, and their posture was strange. Their head was tilted down, but not fully. It looked like they were staring at the sand or maybe scanning it. We all stopped talking and just quietly watched them. Something about it put me on edge. I remember whispering, "What the hell are they doing?" Marcus suggested that maybe they're just looking for something. Jason joked that it was probably some drunk tourist who dropped their keys. We kinda laughed it off and went back to messing around, but I kept glancing at the person. A few minutes passed, and I noticed they had stopped moving. They weren't walking anymore. They were standing completely still now, and they were definitely closer, maybe 30 yards away. That's when I started feeling uncomfortable. We tried not to stare or shine our light at them, but it was getting hard to ignore. There was just something off about the entire thing. Marcus finally said, "They've been standing there for like 5 minutes. Who just stands like that?" Then Jason said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "He's not just standing, he's looking at you, Kyle." I didn't know if he was joking or not. I kinda laughed nervously and said, "Nah, he's looking at the sand." But Jason shook his head and said, "No, look closer. His head's tilted at you." That's when Jason pointed the flashlight at him. I didn't even want him to do that, honestly, but he clicked it on and aimed the beam. The light hit the figure for just a second before the battery started dying and it flickered out. But that second was enough. I saw him. He was almost grayish white with no shirt. He was wearing wet jeans, clearly from the ocean. His arms hung completely limp at his sides. His head was tilted at a weird angle. Not broken, but unnatural. And his eyes were wide open, almost bulging. The second that beam of light hit him, he moved, fast. Without any hesitation, he broke into a full sprint straight at us. I can't even describe how unnatural it looked. There was no build-up. He went from standing completely still to running at full speed, almost like he launched forward. All three of us screamed and bolted. We didn't even look back, we just ran. I could hear Marcus behind me, yelling "Go!" as our feet pounded into the sand. My lungs were burning. We ran all the way back to the steps leading up to the boardwalk and didn't stop until we got to the street. Only then did we turn around. But he wasn't there. The beach was empty. There were no footprints behind us, just the sound of waves. We stood there frozen, trying to make sense of it. We didn't talk much on the walk back to the house. When we got inside, we locked all the doors and windows, pulled the blinds shut, and stayed up until the sun came up. None of us could sleep. I kept expecting to hear knocking or see that pale face outside the window, but thankfully it never came. The next morning, we tried to laugh it off again, say it was probably just some cracked-out homeless guy trying to scare people, but deep down, none of us believed that. The way he moved, the way he appeared out of nowhere, the lack of footprints, it made no sense. We stayed one more night, but we didn't leave the house. We left early the next morning. Over the next few weeks, we tried to move on, but then Jason texted me one night. He said he'd been having dreams, the same dream over and over. He'd wake up and see the guy standing in the corner of his room, soaking wet, head tilted, just staring at him. No movement, no talking, just standing. I told him that was messed up, but I didn't tell him that I was having the exact same dream. Everything was the same, the guy, the posture, just standing in my room, not moving and not talking. Sometimes I wake up thinking I hear the sound of wet footsteps in my hallway. But when I check, no one's there. Then, last week, almost a year later, I was scrolling through this local Facebook group that posts about stuff going on in Ocean City. Someone uploaded a photo they'd taken the night before from the beach. It was grainy and dark, but I recognized what they were talking about. They said, "Does anyone know who this creepy guy is that I saw standing by the water at like 1 a.m.? I clicked the photo. It was blurry, but I recognized him instantly. Same posture, same pale skin. He was just looking down at the water. The comments chilled me even more. There were dozens of people saying they'd seen him too. Some said he was there for hours. One person said they watched him walk into the water and never came back out. Another said they found wet footprints on their back porch 2 streets from the beach. No prints leading to or from them. I don't know what we saw that night, but I know this. I'll never go back to that beach at night again." I grew up in Massachusetts, and every summer since I could remember, I would spend the 3 months in a classic coastal New England town. You know the type if you've been in that area of the country. I had a big group of friends who always did the same thing, and we would get up to all kinds of shenanigans every day after our respective jobs. I was 19 years old when this happened, like most of my friends, and I had just gotten off of a dockboy job I had. So like any other night, I texted my friends what the plan was, and picked up my friend who I'll call Emerson from his job to go get alcohol, as he was the one with a fake ID. We got the alcohol and went back to the small town where we lived. We decided to get on my family's boat that I was able to take out on my own, to have some beers while we wait for everyone else to finish what they were doing. We drove around the little peninsula we were on to this place where a lot of people anchor and hang out. There were a couple of boats anchored already, and it was about 7 p.m., but it still wasn't unusual. We found a spot between the two boats, threw the anchor down, and just chilled and drank. We were having a nice time, listening to the music from the boat to our left, when the one to our right decided to leave, and then eventually the other boat's music shut off. We thought they were going to leave as well, so Emerson and I, in our new drunken state, began to groan and yell to turn the music back on to keep the party going, and a bunch of other stupid stuff like that, but it didn't happen. We were sitting on the bow and started to drink again, before Emerson said, "Dude, look." I turned around to look at the boat, and saw 3 people standing on the edge, just looking at us. My first reaction was to laugh because I was drunk, and then I turned back around, but Emerson kept staring at them. Now, admittedly, I don't have a great sense of danger. I tend to be optimistic and lighthearted about most things, but Emerson was obviously uncomfortable. I told him not to worry about it. They were probably just trying to get a better look or something, but he kept looking with an uncomfortable look on his face, which I didn't get at the time. At this point, it's pretty dark, nothing illuminating the area but the lights from their boat, and therefore you couldn't really see who it was, just the silhouettes of these people. After a couple of minutes of trying to get Emerson to snap out of it, I turned back around and saw they were in the same position, staring at us. I thought it was a joke, so I got the megaphone from the compartment over the steering wheel and said, "20 to watch, fellas," which pissed Emerson off because he sensed something wasn't right. I was putting it back when I heard one of them laugh, audibly a man, but something was off about it. It sounded almost sinister. It was slow and low, and it was kind of raspy. It was at that point that I started to feel uncomfortable. Emerson got up and said, "Let's get the hell out of here, bro, this ain't right," but I responded that it was fine. Right after that, we heard 2 splashes in the water from their direction and saw that only one silhouette remained on the boat. That made Emerson immediately start pulling the anchor up as I was laughing at the situation and at him, which, looking back now, was unbelievably stupid. He tried telling me to turn the engine on while I was laughing my ass off watching him pull the anchor up as I was trying to drink my beer. In fact, I was laughing so much that I didn't notice the sound of the 2 people swimming near our boat. Emerson paused and looked at me with the anchor in his hands, which made me pause too. We couldn't see into the water, as it was dark and the lights were off with the boat. I called out hello and got nothing. Even the sound of the splashing water stopped. Right after that, I simultaneously heard Emerson yell, "Oh shit," and a sudden splash of water behind me before I turned and saw someone trying to climb onto the back of our boat. I freaked the fuck out, and while turning the key, I saw a hand grab the railing on the side of our boat near Emerson, who was yelling and holding the anchor up, ready to fight. I finally turned the boat on and instinctively gunned it forward, smashing into the sandbar that was right in front of us. I put it in reverse and drove backwards as fast as possible until we were out of the little bay and back into more open water. I threw it back in neutral, and Emerson and I just looked at each other before he started giving me the "I told you so's" and "you're a dumbass." I fully agreed and said we should go back, at which he agreed. In hindsight, we should have hightailed it back to the boat docks near my house, but for some reason, we decided to pick up everything that was thrown around during our escape. We didn't even finish before I noticed in the direction we just came from, the lights of a boat approaching, and it was approaching fast. I said no fucking way, and jumped back to the steering wheel and pushed full throttle. Our boat is old, so it doesn't go super fast, and even though I was full speed ahead, they were gaining on us. Emerson started to lose it, saying things like, "Who are these guys? What do they want? Why can't they just let us chill on the water?" So I told him to chill out and focused on going straight to the docks. After about 5 minutes, the docks were in sight, but the boat behind us was so close that we could see the bow itself going up and down with the waves. I honestly didn't know what to do. I banked a hard left and got as close to the shore as I could without beaching, and miraculously, the other boat peeled off in the other direction. We breathed sighs of relief, but I still went full speed back to the docks. After docking and being relieved at the fact that there wasn't any damage to the boat, we met up with our friends after that and told them what had happened, and also came up with some theories, like maybe they wanted to rob us, or maybe they wanted to take the boat. We didn't recognize the boat, so they probably weren't from around here. I don't know. I don't like to think about what would have happened. I'm just glad we didn't find out. I do know that I'm thankful for Emerson being there. Without his skepticism, I think things definitely could have taken a turn for the worst. I had spent a few days in Austin visiting friends. I live in Louisiana, so it's sort of an all-day drive. On my last day in Austin, my old friend Tom had commented on my Instagram story asking when I leave, and I said today. He told me he lived an hour outside of Austin, which was actually in the direction home for me. I hadn't seen Tom in years, and it would be nice to catch up. He said I should stop by, and I said sure, why not? I set my GPS for Tom's address, and it said about an hour-and-a-half drive. Tom and I had been friends back in high school, but lost touch after graduation. We followed each other on social media, but hadn't really spoken in years. When I pulled up, I noticed his house was a little old-fashioned. It wasn't run down or anything, just aged. The wooden porch creaked under my steps, and when he opened the door, I caught the scent of old wood and something rustic, like an old cabin in the woods. Tom was of course very welcoming, giving me a big hug and pulling me inside. Some friendships stay just as pure no matter how much time passes. The inside of the house was just as old as the outside. The furniture looked like it had been around since the 70s, and every step I took on the hardwood floors led out a small creek. It felt kind of Texas, I guess. It was kind of charming in a way, like stepping back in time. We sat down in his living room, catching up on life, drinking whiskey. It was like 5 p.m. by this point. One drink turned into two into three, and before I knew it, I was pretty drunk. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier. Hours passed like minutes, honestly. We were having such a good time catching up that eventually he dropped the question I knew he'd ask. "Hey man, you got a long drive back. Why don't you crash here for the night?" he offered. I hesitated, but he was right. I wasn't in any shape to be on the road. I said yeah, good idea, and asked if I'd take the couch we were on. And then he said, nah, I got a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch. That was good enough for me. We ate some Chinese food that we had delivered, and after a while, he led me down a short hallway to the spare bedroom. I didn't pay much attention to the inside of the room because I was hammered. We both were. But I remember the air in the room was still, like the room hadn't been used in a long time. I barely had time to register my surroundings before I collapsed onto the bed, completely exhausted and drunk. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning, and the room was dark, except for a little bit of moonlight sneaking in through the blinds. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, on the closet door, there was something hanging. At first, it looked like a long black trench coat on a coat rack, but as my eyes adjusted, the shape of it felt wrong. It had a broad upper portion, almost like shoulders, and the way it hung made it look less like fabric and more like a silhouette. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't remember seeing that when I stumbled into the bed, but I had been drunk. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. It was just a coat, nothing more, but I couldn't help myself. I peeked again, still there. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and forced myself to sleep. I don't know how long I was out there before I woke up again. It wasn't just discomfort that pulled me from sleep. It was sound. A slow, soft creaking, like someone stepping carefully on an old wooden floor. My eyes shot open. The room was dimly lit now, dawn creeping through the blinds. I turned my head toward the corner, and my stomach dropped. The coat was gone. I sat up so fast that my head spun. My body was buzzing with a sickening mix of fear and leftover alcohol. I scanned the room, my heart thudding against my ribs. There was nothing in the corner, just an empty closet door. I threw the covers off and rushed to Tom's room. He was snoring, completely unaware of the panic storming through me. I shook him awake, which took a lot of effort considering he was out from all that alcohol. He finally woke up very confused, rubbing his eyes. "The coat," I said breathlessly. "The one on the coat rack in the spare room." He squinted at me, confused. "What coat?" he said. "The black trench coat, the one that was hanging on the closet door. It looked like a person almost." Tom sat up, looking more awake now. "I don't own a trench coat, man. I don't even have a coat rack in that room," he said. I stared at him, waiting for him to say he was messing with me, that this was some kind of joke, but his expression stayed serious. "Come look," I said. He sighed, but got up and followed me back to the spare bedroom. I pointed to the exact spot. "It was right there," I said. Tom scratched his head. He asked me if I was sure I wasn't just dreaming, but I said I know what I saw. I insisted, with my voice shaking slightly. "I woke up and it was there. Then I woke up again and it was gone," I said. We stood in the room for a few moments, both of us feeling the same eerie silence pressing in on us. Tom finally exhaled and shook his head, agreeing we should check the house just in case. We searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no weird coats hanging anywhere, nothing that could explain what I saw. Eventually, Tom tried to convince me that maybe I had been in some kind of half-dream state, seeing things that weren't there. I wanted to believe that, really. I didn't want to think about the alternative. As soon as the sun was fully up, I grabbed my stuff, said goodbye, and hit the road. I almost felt guilty leaving him alone after that. The whole drive back to Louisiana, my mind kept circling back to that moment, waking up to that coat-like figure staring at me from the corner, the way it was just gone in the morning. Maybe Tom played a cruel prank on me, but to this day he's never admitted to anything, so I doubt that. Or maybe, just maybe, there had been someone in that house watching me sleep, and they decided to leave before the morning came. This happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine, whom we can call Anna. This story takes place in Sweden when we were on a road trip. My parents, Anna, and I were going on a domestic trip, and we had an 8-hour drive from home. The plan was to visit a theme park and stay at a campsite, but we hadn't booked one. The day came, and we arrived in the city where the theme park was located, but we planned to visit it the next day, so we needed a place to sleep. Since we had brought tents in our car, my dad searched online for a nearby campsite. He found one that seemed good and close by, so he called the campsite. Unfortunately, that day coincided with a big soccer tournament, and the campsite was fully booked. Since we hadn't reserved a spot in advance, there was no space left for us. My dad called around, but we couldn't find any campsites that were reasonably priced and near the theme park. Our only option was to find a camping spot in nature. We set the GPS to the nearest parking area in a forest to avoid parking fines. Eventually, we found a spot in a nature reserve. When we arrived, there were some people around, so we asked if it was okay to set up our tents there and whether it was a good place to stay. A woman who was hiking told us it was a good place to sleep and that there were no parking attendants. Based on that, we decided to sleep in a small, lonely gravel parking lot. We were surrounded by forest, and a 10-minute walk away was a beach. At first, we considered setting up our tents on the beach, but something told me it would be better to camp in the parking lot. As we got out of the car to set up our shelter for the night, I noticed a lone car parked further away in the lot. It looked like it was in bad condition, and there was no one inside. I found it strange because it was already evening, so there were no more people at the beach or hiking in the woods. However, I didn't think too much about it at the time. I helped my parents set up our tents. They were sleeping in one tent, while Anna and I shared the other, with both tents placed close together. After struggling to build them, we finally finished. Anna and I made our tent cozy, watched YouTube, and ate snacks. By this time, it was around 11 p.m. We wanted to sleep at a decent hour so we wouldn't be too tired the next day. After a while, around midnight, we decided to sleep. At this point, my parents were already asleep in their tent. Anna and I were scrolling through TikTok when we suddenly heard a metallic sound from the parking lot. It sounded like a shovel being thrown onto the gravel. We both jumped in fear and asked each other what it could be. Too scared to peek out of the tent window, we chose to stay silent and listen. The sound had come from the same direction as the abandoned car. We then heard what I assumed was a shovel being thrown into the car's trunk, followed by the trunk slamming shut. We sat in silence, our hearts pounding. Then, we heard the car speed off, as if someone were trying to get away quickly. I texted a friend from a nearby city, telling him where we were staying. He replied, warning me that the beach nearby was known to be dangerous, with organized criminals often engaging in illegal activities there. We had no idea about this before. When I read my friend's message, I felt cold and deeply unsettled. About 10 minutes passed in silence after the car sped away. Anna and I had started to calm down a little, when, out of nowhere, we heard the loudest, most blood-curdling scream from a man coming from the woods. We were absolutely horrified. I immediately texted my mom, telling her we just heard a loud scream. When she didn't respond, I called her phone to wake her up. She finally answered and said neither she nor my dad heard anything. She reassured me that it was probably nothing serious, but at that moment, I couldn't think of any normal reason for someone to scream like that. Anna and I crawled under the blankets, terrified, not knowing what was happening. Every minute felt like an hour. Even though it was midnight, we were too scared to sleep. Suddenly, everything became eerily silent. Then, my blood ran cold. I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around our tents, moving stealthily. Anna and I sat up, frozen in fear. I put my phone down so that its light wouldn't illuminate the tent. My heart was racing and I could hear my own pulse. There was no logical reason for anyone to be walking around our tents in the middle of the forest at this hour. The footsteps moved around our tent first, then toward my parents' tent, and then circled around our car, which was parked nearby. The person stopped and seemed to be looking at our tents. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, I heard the same car from earlier returning. Its headlights lit up our tents, and Anna and I quickly laid down to avoid being seen. I gathered the courage to peek through the small tent window. I saw the car door slam shut before it sped off again. I felt a brief moment of relief when the person left. From my vantage point, I could see the road they had driven down. 5 minutes later, I saw another car approaching fast. It was a police car, racing in the same direction the other car had gone. Nothing else happened after that. Anna and I were still shaken, so we decided to sit in the locked car to feel safer. I stayed awake until around 5 a.m., keeping watch over the forest, while Anna eventually fell asleep beside me. After about an hour, we went back to our tent, and out of sheer exhaustion, finally fell asleep. We woke up around 9 a.m., completely drained. I told my mom everything that happened, and she revealed that she had also heard the footsteps, but when the person was near their tent, she had also heard heavy breathing, like the kind you hear in horror movies during a scary phone call. She had been terrified too. However, my dad had slept through the whole thing, so we had to tell him the story. Without hesitation, we immediately packed our things and the tents, eager to leave as soon as possible. None of us wanted to stay there any longer. Despite the terrifying night, we had a good time at the theme park later that day. However, that evening, I decided to research the forest where we had camped. What I found made my stomach drop. Just a short time before our visit, a man had been murdered there, stabbed to death due to gang-related debts. Even more disturbingly, 2 men had gone missing from that exact beach and had never been found. I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if the person walking around our tents was a dangerous individual, checking to see if there were any witnesses? What if we had been in serious danger without realizing it? Even now, I still think about that night. Who made that horrifying scream, and why was someone using a shovel in the middle of the night in a forest? And the police, what exactly were they chasing? I guess I'll never know. This is a story that still haunts me when I think about it, even though I was so young when it happened. 6 is around the age where a lot of my childhood memories start to become more clear. I have one sibling, my older brother Keith. Keith is 2 years older than me, so at the time he was 8. When I was 6, I had a strict bedtime, 8:30. If I didn't abide by it, or our dad caught either of us up past our bedtime, we'd be in serious trouble. Our dad was always strict with us as kids. Honestly, I don't remember if this happened on a school night or not, but I woke up in the middle of the night to Keith shaking me awake. Keith and I shared a big bedroom upstairs in the house. My parents' room was on the first floor of the house. I was confused why Keith was waking me up, until he told me in a whisper to be quiet and listen, and I did listen, and I heard what he was talking about. It was our mom's voice calling for us downstairs, but it was in a very quiet, whisperish type of voice. I was going to get up to go answer our mom, but my brother told me not to. He said that he didn't think it was Mom. I told him to stop trying to scare me. I remember being so mad at him. He told me to go closer and listen, so I got up and went towards the bedroom door. Right outside of our bedroom door was the little hall that led to the bathroom and another bedroom that our grandma would sleep in whenever she'd sleep over. Directly to the right, when you leave our bedroom, was the stairway downstairs, which had a door as well. I put my ear up on the bedroom door, and I heard the voice clearer. It sounded like our mom's voice, calling our names. Keith, Mikey. I said to Keith, "That's Mom," and he said, "No, it's not." Somehow, as a 6-year-old, and as the little brother, I found myself being the one confident enough to open our bedroom door and then listen through the stairway door. But now, the voice stopped. I whispered to Keith that Mom walked away, and again he said, "That's not Mom." I kept telling him to shut up and that he was scaring me. I unlocked the stairway door and slowly pulled it open to avoid making noise, and when the door was open just enough, I peered through the opening. At the bottom of the stairs was clear as day the silhouette of a person, a woman, but right away, I knew it was not our mom. Whoever it was, she saw me because she said, "Hi, sweetie, come down." Immediately, I shut the door and locked it, and went back into our bedroom and locked that door as well. I started to cry, and Keith kept saying, "I told you." We both agreed to start screaming as loud as we could on 3 to wake our parents. So on 3, we started stomping on the floor and screaming as loud as we could. It didn't take long for our parents to barge up the stairs, pounding on the locked door. At first, our dad was pissed about the door being locked, but as soon as we let them in, they saw that I had been crying and we were genuinely disturbed about something. They listened to us. My mom was particularly concerned after telling us she was not at the bottom of the stairs and she was not calling our names. She asked what the woman looked like, but all we could say was we couldn't tell. Meanwhile, I remember our dad running downstairs to, I guess, look around for the woman. After a bit, our mom kissed us goodnight again, and I'm pretty sure she told us to lock the doors, which was a first. I was too young to catch on, but it seemed as if our parents knew exactly who it could have been. Keith and I looked out the window when we heard the doorbell after a while, and we saw a police car outside. We wanted to go downstairs, but we stayed put. I remember we begged our parents to tell us who it was and what happened, but our parents would always say they didn't know. They would also say they're proud of us for not going downstairs. Personally, I think they did know who it was, and to save my brother and I from any kind of further trauma or fear, they just never told us, because the last time I saw my parents for dinner, I asked them about it, and they still shrugged it off as some random intruder, but that never explained how that woman knew our names. This happened when I was 16. I was still in high school. I obviously didn't have a car yet, so I was at the mercy of my parents driving me around, or just walking if it was close. It was the weekend. My friend Haley was having some of our friends over since her parents weren't home. My mom drove me to her house. Haley lived close, about a 3-minute drive and 20-minute walk. My mom was single at the time, and she also liked to go out too, so she told me that if she's out late, then to just walk or get a ride home, which meant she was going on a date. A few of our girlfriends were at Haley's house, Tina, Courtney, and Belle. The 5 of us hung out in her backyard for a few hours until some boys from our school unexpectedly showed up. By unexpectedly, I mean Haley didn't tell me she was inviting them. The reason I was annoyed by this was because one of the boys that showed up was a boy I had some annoying history with and didn't really want to see. Haley thought she was being cute and sneaky by inviting him there against my knowledge, because she for some reason wanted him and I to work things out. It was just an awkward mess. There were 4 boys and 5 girls, including me, so eventually, I just decided I wasn't really feeling it. So, after a while, I left. I'm sure after I left that some of the others started to leave shortly after because it was already late, but I just didn't want to be around those boys. I made sure to let Haley know how pissed off I was over texts as I was walking home, and she kept saying, "OMG, come back." She apologized and I forgave her, but I still just wanted to go home. I walked for like 5 minutes until I slowed down. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, and when I slowed down, I confirmed I heard footsteps that weren't mine. I turned around, and there was a middle-aged man with a hood up over his head and his hands in his hoodie pocket. He was smiling, looking at me, and said, "How you doing?" I responded, "Hi," and just turned and kept walking. We were in the suburbs, people are walking around. It's not unheard of, even if it was late. 5 minutes more passed of me walking, and every time I'd glance around, that man would still be behind me, more or less the same distance away, maybe a little closer each time I looked. It was not a straight path home. I'd have to make multiple turns onto intersecting roads to get to my house, and each turn I made, he was still there. I was texting my friends about it, and then the man from behind me said, "Isn't it such a nice night? Love this weather." I replied back, "Yeah," and that was it. I started walking just a bit faster, but not enough to draw suspicion like that I'm running away. The man spoke again, and every time he opened his mouth, part of me died a little more inside. Like, why was he talking to me? Why was he following me? He asked, "Are you from the neighborhood?" I replied, "No." I was making my answers short and firm. The man chuckled. I started asking all my friends for help, to send one of the guys to come pick me up. Ironically, the boy who I was trying to avoid was on his way to come get me. I'll just nickname him Brandon. The man behind me then said something that changed everything. He said, "I'm not gonna hurt ya. You live by the elementary school, right?" I turned around, and he stopped in his tracks. He was still smiling, but now his smile seemed more disingenuous, more sinister. I screamed, "Leave me alone," and started to run. I heard the man running behind me, catching up to me. At that point, it was my life on the line, so I started screaming bloody murder. I started screaming, "Help me," for everyone in their houses to wake up and hear. The man dropped his nice guy facade and said, "Shut up, you little bitch." My screams definitely scared him off, because he obviously didn't want a bunch of witnesses about to come out of their houses. He ran away into the darkness, and I saw some lights in the houses around me turn on. One couple came out of their house, and I explained I almost got kidnapped. I stayed there in front of their house until Brandon arrived to pick me up. He drove me home. It was only like a 1-minute drive after that. My mom wasn't home, she was out, and she wasn't answering my texts. I didn't want to be alone. so I invited Brandon in to stay the night. I know he was the happiest camper alive. But it didn't end there. We were up late just talking and reminiscing about old times when we both heard footsteps circling the house. My room in that house was upstairs facing the backyard. We heard the gate to the backyard opening. My mom would never enter through the backyard, so something was off. I held back from yelling out, "Mom," and instead, Brandon and I just looked out the window, watching. We didn't hear any more sounds. We were expecting to see someone walking around the yard, but instead, we both heard a man's voice say, "I see you up there." I let out a very audible gasp and I stepped away from the window. Brandon yelled out something along the lines of, "We're calling the cops, you pussy freak." That's exactly what we did. The fact that this man knew where I lived, he probably knew who I was. What if he knew I was going to Haley's house? Brandon did a lot of the talking on the phone with 911. Looking back, I know he tried really hard to be the man in the situation, and I appreciated that. I was honestly so happy he came inside. The cops showed up, and their presence just made me feel safer. Even just giving them a description of this man made me feel better, like at least something was done. My mom got home soon after, and she was just as freaked out as I was. They kept a police car parked on the block for a few hours as a deterrent, thankfully. From there on, I didn't do any walking at night. I was even scared to go into our backyard after that. My mom had to have our uncle come over and install an entire security camera system. He made no effort in hiding them. They were on full display to deter that creepy man and any other creep from coming to that house. I'm glad to say that the story ended there, because this incident also prompted my mom to sell that house about a year later, just because she hated seeing me living in constant fear in that house. We never found out who that man was.